Azog pushed the dwarves all the way back to the doors of the mountain. There's no way that they're a threat. They're going to lose.
Where's Thorin? We need him. Where is he?
You have Thorin Oakenshield entering the fray, but when you say that, he's not entering with an army. There's just 13 of them.
How you really show them turning the tide in any way that's vaguely realistic, that was a challenge.
What the hell does Thorin do? How does he change these events?
One of the problems with the adaptation of the Hobbit film from the book is that there's a moment where Thorin and his 13 dwarves leap over the parapet and they sort of swing the whole battle. In a book you can get away with, especially a children's narrative like The Hobbit. But visually in a movie, where you're visually seeing a valley full of 15,000, we just couldn't think of a way to do that. That's what I call a battle. That's what you call a battle. Amazing what a difference 13 dwarves can make, isn't it?
Historically, in real battle situations, a very few number of people can make an enormous difference to the outcome of a battle. The expression "the thin red line" comes from a small group of Highlanders facing the Russian heavy cavalry. The Russian heavy cavalry are coming downhill at full charge, going through a line of 2 deep. And they stood there. And the fact they didn't move turned the cavalry. The cavalry wouldn't advance. But all it would have needed was a couple of them to go, "Sod this, I'm off." And so, seeing those 13 guys come out of that gate, that is a massive injection of morale into all the other dwarves that are there.
To the king!
Having said that, we can't go out there and just kill orc after orc after orc until there are no more left.
There's too many of these buggers, Thorin. I hope you've got a plan.
What we wanted to do is to create a target, a single target that Thorin could go after.
We're going to take out their leader, Azog.
By making Azog the mastermind and the general, then if you take him out, cut the head off the snake, then the rest of it's going to fall apart.
So that's why we spent half the battle putting a lot of emphasis on Azog directing operations from Ravenhill.
More! More!
Azog's character is the brain of the army, you know, and he's the most dangerous player on that battlefield, even though he's not directly on the battlefield itself.
Azog is a very modern commander. He's not down on the battlefield mixing it up with his troops, whereas Thranduil, Bard, and Dane are down in the thick of things, risking, death at every second. He's up in his command post and making sure that it's going the way he wants.
A bit like what you imagine Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. He's up on a hilltop somewhere, giving directions to his lieutenants who go out, and he's like the chess master who's got an overview of the battlefield. He's just watching it all unfold and pushing his pieces into play to sort of outsmart the enemy. So it was important for us to establish Azog as the commander, but now you've got a problem because you're in a world without radios or walkie-talkies. How does he actually tell his armies what to do?
The best way of doing that was to turn Ravenhill into Azog's command centre for the Battle of the Five Armies. And Peter's idea would be there was some kind of signalling device that he would have. I came up with a drawing in which I had some kind of weird shapes, but also using fire. I thought the flaming structures would be quite a useful way of being able to see clearly some kind of signal. And Wedder Workshop worked on some ideas for these semaphore devices, who were kind of based loosely on what I'd drawn.
This kind of semaphore apparatus that could, raise and lower its arms and be visible from the battlefield.
And also the logistical question. The orcs arrive very suddenly, but Azog just seems to be there already with this quite elaborate structure. Not quite sure how and when that actually happened, but I don't think you question it.
We just chose to do these big semaphore flags because just felt it was the most effective thing, and it was a visual thing, and he gives a command, the guy pulls a string, the flag raises, and then the army in the valley moves. It just felt like a very simple 1, 2, 3 kind of beat. Having established Azog up on the hill, and that's our target, but then how do you actually get there, because you've got like 10,000 in a pitched battle between you and him? You know, do we have Thorin just walking through the battle? Excuse me, come on, excuse me, I'm trying to head here, make way, you know? Do you do that, or do you just have to get him up there? Well, let's have him jump on the back of a goat, or let's have the guys grab a chariot, because that's a way that they can just bash their way through and get up there.
We're on the mocap stage and we are doing the chariot ride. It's a chariot pulled by 6 battle rams. It's already been shot by Peter, so he's got his cut, he loves it, and this is part of the problem. We had various shots where they were entirely digital, cutting into plates and then back out again. So that's why we need to replicate everything that the live action actors did exactly on the mocap stage.
The 4 of us have been standing in front of the monitors, watching the original plate shots, and just sort of going through it. Okay, he ducks here, he looks over this shoulder, this arm's up or down.
Looking right as the chariot flew into the wall.
What is really problematic, though, is when you have 4 actors and you need to give them unique direction each. I can't talk to 4 people at once, so we've devised a system where we are broadcasting 4 separate feeds into their ears, like presidential security men.
Start swiping your sword at them, downward slice as you hang off the back. You lean right as the chariot slews, and then you start cranking it, moving it left and right.
The chariot sequence may sound like a fairly singular kind of sequence, but in fact, in terms of scope, it's a massive sequence. It's as big as any other sequence we've got in the film.
It's one of those action sequences that could stand alone. We've got trolls coming in with maces and smashing into things, and we've got ogres being decapitated, and you've got this giant iron chariot rolling over ice. To get that sound was a bit of a challenge because we didn't really have a lot of ice available in Wellington. We decided to rent an ice rink up in Auckland, and we went up there and we bought some barbells, you know, weightlifting bells, and we had a frame to sort of attach these barbells to, and we rigged up some sort of pulley system that it just went screaming across the ice as fast as it could.
There came a point in the battle where we wanted to stay at Ravenhill. We're down to the nitty-gritty.
I think some of my favourite war films come down to very intense, personal battles, which is what we actually deliberately did at the end of this film. Even though you have these vast armies fighting each other, in the end it comes down to these characters, one-on-one, face-to-face.
Pete really loved the idea of the Fallen Tower, the sort of set piece for Bolg versus Legolas.
Well, it could be, the ravine could be here, of course. There could be a tower kind of here or somewhere which falls and wedges itself in here. It'd be nice if it was in front of the frozen waterfall. Yeah.
I just had Bilbo, you know, scampering across it and, you know, it falling apart while he's being pursued. But instead, Peter decided it was way more interesting to be used as a dynamic set piece for a fight.
I mean, what's interesting is the way that the tower would be crumbling. It would be like a series of, you know, bricks, stones that are just starting to fall away. So it's like it's eroding itself. Gravity is just collapsing and falling away until there's hardly anything left.
So with a character like Legolas, who, you know, he can do amazing things and he's been established as having near superhuman ability.
Legolas fights in a stunt-based fighting style. He's able to almost defy gravity and slide down elephant trunks and everything imaginable.
The elves sort of had this magical, I guess, magical gravity, which is taking back to Caradhras, where he's walking on top of the snow.
Everybody's wading through this waist-deep snow, apart from Legolas, who's able to just walk across the top of the snow because he's light enough that he won't punch through the surface. It's established that elves are light. I think that's something that Tolkien did write about.
I think the one sequence in the Battle of Five Armies that comes to mind is when the tower starts falling away from underneath him,
where he's able to use the inertia of these giant blocks that are just starting to fall. It's pushing the boundaries of what we're prepared to believe, but the animators have a setup where they can make sure that anything that's falling in their scene is falling at the rate that gravity determines. To help sell the moment, we played around with the speed of the footage. We're able to review the footage at normal speed, as we're seeing here, and so we can check that the simulation of the blocks is working at like a one-to-one basis, and then we can also review the footage at half speed, the way it's going to be seen in the final film.
Peter always said, I want the battle to be in the snow. I want the battle to be the middle of winter. You start off in Hobbiton in the spring and you go journeying into the summer and then gradually into the sort of cooler autumn. By the time you're in the Battle of Five Armies, you're in the middle of winter.
I mean, if we're going to do frozen lake stuff, you've got to sort of have things floating and bits of ice flow sort of broken up a bit, don't we? I mean, there's no point having a thing on the frozen lake if we're not doing stuff with ice cracking,
yes,
stuff flipping.
Yeah.
I'm a great fan of Alexander Nevsky, which was Eisenstein's classic medieval battle film. We see a cavalry charging across a frozen lake, which of course starts to collapse, and the knights are kind of fall into water in these very dramatic scenes.
It's also just a horrible environment to have to fight in, pushing your way through water. It slows you down, it encumbers you. That's just a really, really powerful visual.
Sound speed. Okay. At the moment, we're doing motion capture with Manu Bennett, who plays Azog. And, like a year ago, we shot Richard doing his half of this fight. And now we're doing mocap for Manu for his sections of the fight.
And back forward. It's been a strange experience because I've never actually had to fight against Richard Armitage, but basically act without the actors there. This is where stuff gets serious.
Yeah, that's nice. Should we try another one? Most of this is tying into cameras that we have already shot. Like, we've literally got to take this and actually reverse engineer it into the live action cameras. So I just want to concentrate on the choreography of Manu at the moment. Make sure that what he's doing is kind of line it up with what Richard's choreography was. It's tricky stuff. So is it what's the order? It's a swing. It's two ducks.
Two ducks. A sway.
And a vertical.
Time to go to war. Here we go.
3, 2, 1, action.
So Bjorn's a big favourite for a lot of people. He's an embodiment of nature and a powerful force.
In the Battle of the Five Armies, he comes in and things change, it's like Bjorn's here, oof, it's all different.
In the book, of course, he is the character that in fact turns the tide of the war.
Nothing could withstand him, and no weapon seemed to bite upon him. He scattered the bodyguard and pulled down Bolg himself and crushed him.
We did want to see a big battle with Beorn and it all being this whirlwind of sort of fantastical violence.
It's pretty explosive and dynamic stuff. Beorn Bear just doing his thing. In the theatrical release, we did get a few shots of Bjorn being deposited into the battle and really just causing some carnage.
But a lot more shots that we had been designing for the actual theatrical release didn't make it into the film.
With the lack of time, we don't have time. Weta doesn't have time to get Beorn in the film for the release.
It'll be short, violent, smashing, bashing. It won't be ultimately very long in terms of screen time. Okay.
Coming to the end of the theatrical edition was an interesting emotional roller coaster for us.
It's been a tough few weeks. It's been probably the hardest and toughest post-production on any of these 6 films that we've done.
This film, we were so up against it. Time-wise, I've never been in a situation where deadlines would come and we would be working just to try and get it out there.
I thought we had more driving.
Don't panic, don't panic.
At that point in time, we were really pushing forward towards, trying to get to the finish line of the mix.
Or mix like bastards. It's like the hounds of hell are upon us.
They are.
Peter was trying his hardest to get the best possible movie on the screen.
We're still in a situation where there's a lot of shots to come. Peter's shooting a lot of camera work in these areas.
It's right shoulder back. Should we just do one last one for luck?
Cool.
Well, we're close to the end because it's premiere in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, I don't know, sometime like that. I don't know. Well, it's actually the 5th of November today, Guy Fawkes Day. Sounds like one of your fireworks going off. Were you out there with your bloody tape recorder last night?
I missed it. It's like being on death row in here. Every day's the same.
Yeah, we know.
We start getting into the world of, limited amount of time for getting it, rendered out completely.
There were certain constraints. Running time would be one of them, I guess, but also just the amount of time that we had to get the film out. So there were things that Peter wanted to put in the film that he didn't get the opportunity to put in.
It was sort of what we were after, but it wasn't 100%, but we ran out of time.
By the end of this week, I'm going to try and delete about 6-7 minutes of the movie.
It's about where you want your resources spent in those final weeks before releasing a film, and by removing certain scenes, other visual effects shots were able to be concentrated on. And these were major set pieces that actually came out of the theatrical edition. In many ways, they were much more key action pieces than anything that had come out of previous films.
My biggest sadness on the film was not getting to see those shots of elves and dwarves fighting with each other in the theatrical release. That was one of my big memories from the show, was sort of telling the entire animation team we're actually not doing them, but we were more than halfway through them at that point.
probably worked on the chariot for 6 months. We worked hard and, you know, made it look really exciting and cool. I was sad to see that go.
I remember being at the premiere. I turned to my wife and said, they've left out the dwarf chariot. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed that that wasn't in the theatrical release. I was a bit gutted. Because it was such an enjoyable scene. And listen, I know there's only so many hours in the day, and even Peter Jackson, who only probably sleeps 2 hours a night for years on end, can only accomplish so much.
We tried to put the chariot sequence in there, and what happened is we ended up cutting it down, making it shorter, losing this gag, losing that gag. I just got to the point where I just said, no, wait, stop. This chariot sequence, which was kind of cool once, has now been reduced to virtually nothing. So I just said, listen, let's save the chariot. Let's do the chariot in its entirety. Every single gag we ever thought of for the chariot, let's do that as a big sequence in the extended cut.
We put a lot of stuff on hold, so we'll come back to it. Some scenes that we were some of us a bit sad to see go and not make it into the film, we're very happy to see come back for the extended edition.
Good morning.
So we have completed film 3, the theatrical release, and we've all had a big Christmas break and a rest, and now it's 2015 and we're not finished with Middle-earth yet. We're back on deck to finish the DVD extended edition.
We're right back into the heat, back into the battle ourselves. We're fighting. We're fighting for the film.
So the extended edition so far, I think it's running at about 380 shots, which is considerable. I mean, some visual effects films, that's their entire visual effects shot count. So for a DVD, that's pretty massive.
Without the coffee machine, this film would not get made.
The extended edition has everything in it that Peter ever wanted to put into film 3. So there's some extra gag scenes with the dwarves, which are a lot of fun, which sort of build out their character. It's not just action sequences and gags that Peter's putting into the extended edition. Some of the material that he's putting in really expands the story. There's a big extended battle sequence between the dwarves and the elves.
So you'll see that the battle is actually quite different story-wise than it is in the theatrical version.
In the extended edition, by the time the orcs arrive, the elves and the dwarves have actually already started to fight each other, which, you know, is quite a different thing.
I mean, literally bows twang and arrows whistle in the book, if I'm remembering rightly. So there is a volley, but it's not perhaps as physical as Pete shows it.
This is the formidable elven archer barrage that, you know, must be the fear of all armies in Middle-earth.
We only saw it fleetingly in the Helm's Deep battle, the efficient killing machines that was.
The 100% guaranteed successful killer volley of arrows coming over.
We've all seen arrows go up in the air and guys hide behind shields, and, you know, it's like, well, you know, you'd think that'd bring something else to the party. You're going to go and fight an enemy that's going to lob arrows at you the whole time. You'd design something that would disrupt as many of those as possible. So, you know, I sort of described an idea to Ignacio Pena, who's one of our previs artists.
Yeah, that's feeling a bit better. This is sort of the proof of concept idea that we came up with without really thinking too much about the science of how the thing loads and stuff, but Pete responded quite well to the idea.
These ballistas that have these giant crossbow bolts, and as they fly out, they splay out 4 bolts that are hinged and spin.
We could think of no name for them, so we just called them twirly-whirlies.
Hey, how do you like that? The old twirly-whirlies? Hey, you buggers!
We've invented a weapon that they should have invented in the Middle Ages.
The Dwarven army has this incredibly well-trained, kind of finely honed cavalry unit.
My favourite line is "Send in the goats."
Send in the goats!
Which I'm sure no general has ever yelled in battle before.
The idea with the Dwarven cavalry was to give the dwarves another form of combat.
And along the way, the idea of using rams came in, these big sort of mountain goat-like animals that dwarves could ride on and could be incredibly sure-footed over rough terrain, and also are just bullish and unstoppable once they get moving, because that's a dwarf, right?
The extended editions of all Peter's Middle-earth films are the definitive versions of those films.
Is that it? Are there any more?
What we're creating here is the legacy version of the film. They contain the complete story that Peter wants to tell.
This is the Battle of the Five Armies that I originally, always had in my imagination. This is the battle as it should be.
It sort of feels like we're going out on a bang. We're leaving Middle-earth with a really significant battle that I think everyone will have this feeling of satisfaction that we've done our best stuff here in kind of the last big foray into Middle-earth.
Everything's approved.
We just finished, yeah. Actually, last night we wrapped up the final 3 shots in the extended edition material. I think over the next few days it's going to really start to sink in that that's it, for us. After 15, 20 years.
This is a very cool piece of technology that was actually developed here in New Zealand.
We're done in Middle-earth here at Weta Digital.
Coming to the end of it, that is the end of an era. The stories are there, the world's on film, and it's something that you can keep coming back to, but we'll never live inside of it the same way that we have for these last 17 years.
The way Weta has changed is actually the whole film industry in New Zealand has changed. It's gone from this very small thing to a top-notch film crew that would compete with any film crew in the world.
As a child, I would have thought, we would never have a movie industry that could do large numbers of visual effects. And epic filmmaking on this scale, that's the great thing that Peter was able to bring and, believe in and create out of sheer determination and self-belief.
I'll look back on these films personally as a great experience, but I think it's a series of films that have put New Zealand on the world stage and have shown not only what we're capable of as a filmmaking community, but how amazing our country is. They've just been 6 films that have just really changed a nation, I guess. Is that too bold to say?
Hey, we made it! That's right. Hey! Great!
It's like, we finished Fellowship, we finished Towers, we finished Return of the King, and here we are. Well, here we are.
Over 6 films, there are so many moments in there that are some of the most fun times I've had in my life. And it was spent with good people.
It'll take an hour to get awesome.
These will always occupy a place within us as films that you can look back on and go, wow, well, yeah, no, we did work on these films. Because they will stand the test of time and we'll still be as proud of them as we are now.
Excellent.
Anybody else got anything?
No! Is it us finished?
That's us finished.
Wow, Jesus Christ.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap. Thank you, gentlemen.
When we finished, it was almost anticlimactic because we sort of, wow, it hasn't sunk in yet.
No, that's great. Good.
That's good.
Yeah, that was all pretty painless, really, wasn't it? Oh. Well, it was for me.
Yeah. You're talking about the last 15 years?
Good. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you very much. And ladies, I'll just take them to the back.
But it was a nice goodbye.
The elves, immortal, wisest and fairest of all beings.
Wood elves. They're leaving Middle-earth, never to return.
All light is sacred to the Eldar, but wood elves love best the light of the stars.
Elves are hard. Elves are probably the hardest of all the characters to bring to life on screen. It's almost like they live between worlds, that they can see beyond the shores of this world.
I have walked there sometimes, beyond the forest and up into the night.
It's a quality that you're looking for that's almost impossible to define. It's impossible to define. It's a sort of elegance, it's a beauty, it's an agelessness.
I remember asking Peter in the first film, how does one, what elves do? How does one be an elf? Because they have this otherness, this wisdom and this grace and a timelessness that is at once human but not human.
As Professor Tolkien describes them, they're incredibly graceful. There's a beauty about them. There's another worldliness about them. So you need to make these characters feel real and ancient and grounded in this mythology.
The work of Tolkien's heart was his writing about the elves, and they are a great part of his whole picture of Middle-earth, the most important part.
He started with creating the elven languages, those beautiful calligraphies. Of course, for Professor Tolkien, language is the basis of everything. It informs his entire world. And from the elven language then came a culture that would have created beauty wherever they go, in their buildings, in their poetry. They are creatures of light and enlightenment. And so for him, the elves were the soul of Middle-earth.
The elves, as they appear throughout ancient mythology, were originally thought of as more or less human-sized creatures, but more powerful than humans. A lot like the Irish tradition of the Tuatha De Danann, the great fairy folk of Ireland who had been great warriors.
The elves demand respect in the ancient legends and the ancient myths. They're much wiser than human beings.
But ultimately, starting around 1600, people just stopped taking them seriously. Shakespeare was writing things like A Midsummer Night's Dream, and from that point on, we see the elves diminishing down into little fairies, dancing among the flowers. This more or less reached its peak with works like Peter Pan from very early 20th century literature.
You think Tinkerbell, little flimsy creature with wings. Well, this was the Victorian and Edwardian age in which Tolkien grew up. There was a whole school of fairy painting, which was immensely popular right up to the First World War. But Tolkien, as he read his way more and more into ancient literature, he thought that the whole idea of elves and of fairies had been diminished and downgraded. And I think that really bugged Tolkien, and he wanted to go back to what he saw of as a nobler conception.
Tolkien's elves were an amalgamation of all of the reading and research that Tolkien had done and all of his knowledge and love for ancient myth and legend.
He's a kind of mythic Sherlock Holmes who can put the clues together in a way that nobody else ever has. For instance, there's the Old Norse fragments about what kind of elves there are. It says there are Ljósalfar, light elves, and Dökkalfar, which are dark elves. Well, this caused immense confusion to many scholars. So Tolkien's brilliant solution to this was to say, all right, let's stop thinking about what color the elves are. The real difference is there are elves who've seen the light and elves who have not seen the light and remained in darkness. And in this case, the light is the light in Valinor, the undying land. Some elves, like Galadriel, went all the way to Valinor, and they are the high elves. They grew steadily wiser and more powerful. But others never got past Mirkwood. They stayed in what was then Greenwood the Great, and those are the wood elves.
The way Tolkien kind of describes them is as less noble and wise in body and in spirit.
The feasting people were wood elves, of course. They differed from the high elves of the West and were more dangerous and less wise.
It was actually quite fun to finally get to the woodland elves and to be able to show a slightly more earthy race of elves, the Sylvan elves.
You know, you're reading the book, and I think my enduring memory of the Sylvan elves from the book, bit that I couldn't believe, was they got drunk.
There stood barrels and barrels and barrels. For the wood elves, and especially their king, were very fond of wine.
Say what you like about our ill-tempered king, but he has excellent taste in wine.
They are, I guess you would say, a lesser race in a way. Perhaps not as high in culture and art and music, and yet in love with this world, invested in the little streams and the great trees.
In the book, The Hobbit, the Sylvan elves are almost faceless. There's no personality to hang on to. But that doesn't work for a film, of course. It never will. You have to bring character, because how does an audience care about them? And that was the pivotal role that Tauriel played.
We needed to show you what a Sylvan elf might be, but first and foremost, quite honestly, we created the character of Tauriel because we're going to have 13 old dwarves with long beards. We have Gandalf, of course, Bilbo. We've got Legolas, Thranduil, and we have Bard. You really feel the weight of that. It becomes a very blokey story quite quickly.
These stories really do lack female characters, particularly The Hobbit.
There's no girls here. This is very blokes out here.
This could have been a fucking nightmare, that aspect of it. It could have been a nightmare because of the testosterone and because of the maleness flying around.
We did look at where the opportunities lay for creating a good, strong female character that could have her own story. And we looked at a few interesting places where that could happen. Could she be a hobbit?
We thought about the idea of female characters. We thought about somebody in Lake Town. I mean, we did consider different ideas way back at the beginning.
We didn't just want to create her for the sake of creating a female character. She needed to have a purpose in the storytelling. I think it was Fran who said she should be an elf.
It just is an interesting idea because then we thought we could explore the idea of an elven female character who is not Galadriel. She's not the wise seer. Take it in directions that would be kind of fun as filmmakers.
Originally, her name in the audition scripts was Itariel, which means starlight, but she needed to be more earthy. So we wrote down a whole bunch of names in Elvish and we sent them to David Salo. He does all our translations. And one of the names that we wrote down was Daughter of Mirkwood. So when it came back as Tauriel and he said it and you heard it, and it was just like, oh, that's it, forget about it, that's her name.
Tauriel may not literally exist in the books in the sense that her character is never described as we see her on screen, but there are definitely antecedents of her character in Tolkien.
People always say there are no female characters in Tolkien's stories, but of course you have the Lady Galadriel, who is the most powerful of them all in many ways. And he was never averse to female characters fighting. Look at the Lady Eowyn in Lord of the Rings. She was a warrior princess.
I am no man.
Examples that spring to my mind are Luthien. She rode straight into Morgoth, who was like the big bad version even of Sauron. Similarly, you've got Edril, who is Elrond's grandmother. Her sword is the sword that Arwen carries.
If you want him, come and claim him.
There's certainly nothing in the Tolkien kind of mythology that is sexist in the way that, you know, the elvish warriors are all blokes and the women stay home and cook. I mean, it's not like that. But at the same time, we didn't want Tauriel just to be Xena warrior princess. You know, she had to have more complexity and more interest.
Over the months, Tauriel's character evolved, and we did a lot of design work that involved the leaf mail. Very fortunately, I sit as a judge on this amazing event in New Zealand that happens every year called the World of Wearable Arts. And it was on stage I saw this dragon light woven out of leaf mail and fine chainmail costume that was so beautiful and so inspiring, created by a New Zealand artist called Eve Gilliland. So I approached her and asked her if she'd consider coming to the workshop and sharing it with us.
It has an amazing movement quality to it.
You can see levels.
was just sticking to the form.
Yeah, no, it's
yeah,
fantastic.
The model looked amazing.
It's fantastically
I love
fitting.
this, where see that movement there with those little jewels?
Yeah, that's
and
terrific.
On stage,
that's
that looked
terrific.
incredible.
Yeah, that's almost the sort of movement that we want the elves and the trees to have, isn't it? That kind of unholy movement.
We then hired Eve, and she worked tirelessly for many, many months working with this technique. This is at a similar time that Nick was evolving his ideas, and so he started to bring Eve's design influence into his drawings.
So we wanted to try and incorporate that into the elf designs because they felt like they sat right with that culture. But ultimately we ended up pushing that scale mail idea as sort of Toriel's more signature look.
Eve helped the team learn how to put these garments together to achieve this amazing body of work.
There's been a team of people doing this very, very fine embroidery and then putting this shifting colour underneath it. Peter described this to us as almost a kinetic fabric that when she moves, it moves with her, but when she comes to rest, it settles and comes to rest almost like he described it as a ninja assassin of the forest.
We got to shoot tests. We shot some of them in the back courtyard of our workshop. We had Kate Venables, one of our costumers, jumping around in this stuff.
It was in many ways the ideal solution because we were looking for a way to armour her without covering her in armour. And it allowed her to still have her feminine grace and her elven grace that was just so necessary to that character.
And then we started casting. In Tariel's case, we needed her to be someone who could be brave enough to take on a character who is not actually part of the book. And you know, it's hard to find the right person who can do that. And we had met and known Evangeline previously, so she came to mind.
When I received a message that Fran Walsh and Peter Jackson were trying to get a hold of me, I was laid up in bed post-labor, unable to, I was bedridden. I couldn't get up on my own.
So Fran and I were both sitting there thinking, she's never going to say yes. She's never going to say yes. She's just got this baby.
The prospect of working at that point wasn't the most attractive thing in the world to me. But when I was asked to play an elf in The Hobbit, my favorite book of all time, I couldn't say no.
As soon as Evangeline was cast, she's got a very distinctive look. And once you've got the actress cast, it definitely informs the design process a lot more. Kind of makes it more concrete and you kind of see what works and what doesn't a bit clearer.
When I arrived, the look that I was supposed to embody was depicted in a graphic sketch. I don't look like that graphic image that I came to see when I first arrived. I wish I did. I saw the graphic image and I went, oh, that's what you're gonna make me look like. That's amazing. And then they put the costume on me and I looked like a female dwarf. I mean, it didn't help that I was only 3.5 months post-pregnancy. I was so stocky. It was horrible. I didn't look elegant, I didn't look graceful, I didn't look elvish at all. I looked like a little dwarf.
It's not flowing in the way that it did in the drawing, for example, for whatever reason. Something that really was like liquid coming, that was always the hope, that it would have this kind of liquidy flow.
It didn't work, so we discarded it and started again.
So the head of wardrobe sat down and she made a design and she tried it on me and we knew we were on the right track.
Tariel's costume incorporated 2 colorways of this tree bark fabric I got, and she had a coat of that, green, and over the top of that she wore a very fitted brown leather corset, and down the front of it we had these laser cut leaves. I'm quite fond of layering fabrics so you get a glint of something else, and particularly on the elves I wanted them to have a slight magical feeling where you kind of go, whoa, what is that exactly?
In all the sort of long-legged movements they had me doing, it's nice to see the legs come through.
Tariel also had to be distinct from the hunter elves so that when you saw a whole bunch of them together and she was standing amongst them, you could pick her out because she's a main character. And one way that we kind of jumped on picking her out from the others was with her hair.
And she had hair sort of down past her calves. I sometimes think Peter does these things to see if I can do it or it can be done. There's always this challenge going on.
So I looked at it and I went, right, OK, I can work out how this has got to be done, so we had to make a wig with very long hair, and then we had to extend it.
Yes, there's girls in Russia that grow their hair long and they sell it. It's their job. They just sit at home having to sort of sit there and wait for their hair to grow. And they sort of read books and magazines and eat and drink, and they sort of wait till their hair gets long. Yes, it's a profession.
To get her hair as long as we wanted it, we can't get hair that long. So what we've done is we've cheated by this is the wig, and then underneath is another piece here, which extends the length, and then when it's put on the head, the whole lot is combed together so as to form this one big, long tail.
I love my hair. I love Tauriel's wig. I love the color. I'm so excited. I've always wanted to play a redhead.
The color originally was, I would call it a chestnut brown. And in the process of us doing our show and tells, it got redder and redder and redder.
I said I'd love to see it a little bit more poppy red.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could put a little bit more into it. I mean, I can certainly go with that too, because it's not quite as red as the artwork.
At one point, Peter said, no, just more red. I went, really? Okay. I went, okay, fine.
I mean, that colour there, if you can see it, that colour's not bad. It's not quite the same.
I could do a bit more in the front.
Maybe.
And in the end, this wig and the hairpiece had 9 separate lots of tinfoil highlights.
You have dyes called violet, tomato, and grass.
Yeah, we do indeed. We did it with thousands of little fine highlights and all different colours, so it looks like a natural colour, so it doesn't look like a dyed colour. And so that's how we ended up with this bright red.
I'm a lucky elf. A lucky little elf. Right, Hill? A lucky little elf. I have the biggest ears out of all the elves in all the movies ever.
Just in case you haven't noticed.
They were lovely because they wrapped right against her head. The one thing I don't think you want is them sticking out.
There's a rare opportunity occasionally that comes along when there's actually been some filming done and you can look at it and go, OK, we're going to add something here. And we had that chance with Tauriel and Legolas to offer a second iteration on her costume.
When we first saw them in the realm of Mirkwood, there's a need for them to be in a very much a stealth-like sort of camouflage situation. But now it's actually about going out and leaving the realm.
It was really Leslie Burks-Harding that came through and found the essential ingredients and found the lines that we needed for it. And it was she that really designed that costume.
What they needed was a traveling costume, something that could be elegant, simple, fluid. She needs to be able to move in it really well.
The new elements that ended up being introduced, I think in many ways recalled Arwen's riding costume.
It was a beautiful garment. It had everything about it that they wanted this to be, but obviously it needed to be a bit different.
This is so much more beautiful.
Yes.
When I put it on, I felt like now I'm Tauriel.
Dirahi waifim. Dirahi.
Elvish, rock on.
The use of Elvish was important because it lends an authenticity to the worlds that you're trying to bring to life.
Elvish is an extensive language system. It's got grammar and syntax. There's a very clear pronunciation guide that Tolkien himself gave us.
Okay, Evie, here we go. Ready, and action.
Within the Tolkien world, we have 2 different types of Elvish. Sindarin, that is their common speech, so it is the everyday communication.
In Gannen Leor.
Kiochin. Danganle. And then there's Quenya, which is ancient Elvish.
Nino Hithaiglia Lasto Bethar.
It predated Sindarin. It has a timeless, formal quality to the language itself, kind of like Latin in a way. And it's used, particularly in these movies, for spells, for incantations.
Now, I'll never forget that Elvish incantation because, I mean, I just said it over and over and over and over and over again. Men no nin na hon yelia dan nanin hon leethon gurth. Yelia dan nanin hon leethon gurth. And I'm sure every dwarf in the room could recite that one for you too because they had to hear it like 100 times at least. Men no nin na non yelia dan nanin. Hon leethon gurth. Men no hin na non yelia dan nanin hon le. Oh, I like
Very good. How do you draw them?
From the back, it's like it's invisible.
Oh.
We spent quite a lot of time thinking about how weapons can be used. We all sort of looked at what had been done in the original films. We wanted to come up with Elvish weapons that felt in the same kind of family as what had been done on Lord of the Rings. The idea with these weapons is that they can actually sit across the back of the arm, which enables you to have a very different fighting action.
Her two daggers resembled kukri knives. So Nepaline kukri knives, they actually bend. They sort of concave and they don't go straight. We wanted to incorporate it, but make it her own and just how she would post it up and have one pointing down one arm and having one going out the other side.
I love my daggers, but if I'm honest, I have dagger envy.
Legolas and Tauriel, who has the better weapons? Of course, Legolas does. That's a ridiculous question.
Oh, he's got his knives out again, guys.
He's got his knives out. I've got my old LOTR faithful on my back, which could not be improved upon, is what we decided. You cannot improve upon perfection.
If I had to choose, I would take Legolas's daggers over Tauriel's daggers, but I do like the look of mine. I think they're pretty.
So what they've done for Tauriel is good, actually. Pretty good, but not quite as good.
Keep it as a promise.
What we had with Tauriel was a slightly different elf. She has a great curiosity of other races, of the world outside.
She literally hasn't been anywhere. I mean, Tauriel's probably one of the younger elves, 1,000 years old, maybe 1,347 years old, I don't know. But, you know, she isn't as old as Legolas or Thandril.
And she engages and ultimately falls in love with a dwarf of all people. It was a nod, in a way, towards the love that Gimli felt for Galadriel. It was just one of those wonderfully beautiful moments that Professor Tolkien wrote so effortlessly.
And what gift would a dwarf ask of the elves?
Nothing.
The other members of the company get their various valuable gifts from Galadriel.
Thank you, my lady.
But Gimli says he'd just like a strand of hair, which is really, as I say, a kind of romantic thing to do. And you would expect him to ask for something tangible, but he asks for something precious instead.
It does go back to chivalric romance, like the Arthurian stories. It's a personal connection that she acknowledges he is her knight and that he will go and do deeds in her name. And he does.
I asked her for one hair from her golden head. She gave me 3.
And so we created a love story between Kili and Tauriel. But we had an instinct that you could never push the story too far.
Aye, aye! You got the timing wrong. Bugger!
In that initial spider fighting scene, some of us felt that it should be totally icy, a dwarf meeting an elf, and business as usual. And then there were some of us who thought, no, there should be an instant, unexplainable chemistry.
I have heard many tales of the beauty of the earth.
And I have heard many tales of your kind.
What do they say?
They say never trust a dwarf. I was very relieved that scene got cut from the film because I don't feel that we ever, on the day, came to a good resolution. But by the time we get to the cell scene, we were all very much in agreement that this is a great moment for romance to start to take seat. The stone in your hand, what is it?
My mother gave it to me so I'd remember my promise. That I would come back to her.
In terms of when and how and where those two characters might kiss, might actually have that moment, I think I'd put it on the lake shore. We trusted the actors to know exactly where it should go.
And then what do we think about this kiss moment?
Have we earned a kiss? I don't know if we've earned a kiss.
I think I earned it.
I said, Aiden, no offense to you, I'm not trying to get out of kissing you, but it just felt to me like it was premature.
I think Evangeline knew exactly when it should happen. And it's when she understood that what she felt had been real. And now she had to let it go.
This is gonna ruin the most romantic scene in the movie. But I have been waiting for 3 years to tell this story, and I'm gonna tell it. To understand the sort of physical dynamics of that scene, I'm supposed to delicately sort of lean over him and kiss him. Well, to reach his face over his barrel chest, I'm almost hanging upside down. I'm trying to reach his lips, but I'm crying. And one take, I came up from giving him his kiss, and there was this string of my snot running from his lips to my nose.
Terrific, we've got great stuff. Great stuff. Oh, hang on there.
Finally, they called cut, and Peter said, don't worry, we'll get it in post. So embarrassing.
Even the latest version of Photoshop, you can't quite replace a good old-fashioned pencil. A fine selection of dwarves and elves. Getting closer if you want.
Fran and Pete had spoken about reprising the little vignettes on the end titles, as we did at the end of Return of the King. And I said it's brilliant, and so of course it had to be Alan Lee and John Howe, because they can draw those characters better than anyone.
We have 32 altogether. Given the dearth of feminine characters, there were only 2. So we split them up by nationality.
John did my portrait because he was Canadian and I'm Canadian. Seeing Tauriel's portrait at the end, it was a total surprise, and I was really touched by it. It meant a lot to me because my character wasn't in the book and was very controversial. It sort of felt like an affirmation. I guess the character, Tauriel, had sort of earned her place in this world.
In a great hall with pillars hewn out of the living stone sat the Elven King on a chair of carven wood.
In the book, Thranduil is not fully drawn, so to speak, as a character. In fact, he's not actually named in The Hobbit, except to say that he is the Elven King.
Tolkien doesn't really describe anything more than he's the king of the woodland realm.
But, you know, in a film, you can't quite get away with some of the simplicity that you can in a book, especially a book written for younger people. It has to feel real. And that's one of the rules that we've always given ourselves with these films, is to have our characters have a degree of complexity.
Cate Blanchett and Hugo Weaving and Orlando Bloom created such iconic elves. And so here I had this new elf to play with, and I was thinking, what makes this very powerful king of elves different than them? She's an elf with dungeons. You know, there's a lot to that.
One of the screenwriter's strengths in this film is to actually remain faithful to what's in the book, but nevertheless add all those dimensions to characters like Thranduil.
As filmmakers, we take our clues from Tolkien, obviously, we take our guidance from the book.
The king's cave was his palace, and the strong place of his treasure, and the fortress of his people against their enemies.
Thranduil's underground kingdom in the forest is really an echo or a parallel to this elven king Thingol, who's featured in Tolkien's earlier stories. And Thingol lived in a hill underground in this amazing guarded realm called Menegroth.
For the Woodland Realm, we chose to take that a little bit further and create this king who is now literally in a state where his people are shut off from the outside world.
No one enters this kingdom, and no one leaves it.
If the Elf King had a weakness, it was for treasure, especially for silver and white gems.
And so that became an interesting idea. It was like, okay, where did this come from?
The Elven King, the character himself, is inspired by a character from Tolkien's earlier writings, King Thingol Greycloak.
Thingol, also like Thranduil, has his weaknesses, and one of them is passion for the jewels, and that was a kind of recurring theme in Tolkien's writing.
And we thought, okay, so maybe that's something that you can turn into a character story.
There are gems in the mountain that I too desire. White gems of pure starlight.
Because we needed to know why he would march upon that mountain without it feeling greedy. So what we decided was that these gems had a meaning for him.
The heirlooms of my people are not lightly forsaken.
In ancient days, they had had wars with some of the dwarves, whom they accused of stealing their treasure.
We've seen all of that in earlier writings that predate The Hobbit. King Thingol had a great quarrel with the dwarves, which is what Tolkien referred to in The Hobbit.
Thingol arranges for the dwarves to make a necklace for him, but then there is a dispute over payment and ownership.
Now, there's some real contention as to what exactly happened, but the dwarves actually went in and killed Thingol in his own halls.
In revenge, the elves go after the dwarves, and they wipe these guys out. So you can understand the intensity of the blood feud between these two races that persists for thousands of years afterwards.
We took that story thread about a dispute over jewels that Professor Tolkien in the Book of the Hobbit ascribes to past grievances and expanded on it. And it began to help us shape Thranduil.
The film did rather well in motivating Thranduil's refusal to help the dwarves when Smaug attacked, and the dwarves' deep resentment of the fact that he refused to help. Well, that's not in the book, but it is, I think, quite consistent with the way that Tolkien presents the elves in particular.
Tolkien clearly was inspired by his own construction of King Thingol living in the caves in the Great Forest. But we don't know whether the Elven King in The Hobbit was originally intended to be Thingol or a Thingol-like character. And it's not until he starts writing the sequel that he decides, no, this is a new character.
We find out his name in The Lord of the Rings when we meet his son, Legolas Greenleaf.
Maigovanen, Legolas Thranduilion.
Govannas Vingwenenle, Haldir Olorien.
One of the things that we got to do in The Hobbit is to bring in the character of Legolas. He's not actually in the book, but I think we would have probably been killed if we hadn't met Legolas in these movies.
Do not think I won't kill you, dwarf.
It's highly likely that Legolas was still living at home with his dad at the events of The Hobbit, and why not have him part of the story, taking advantage of the fact that we have now the full picture of Tolkien's family tree, as it were.
One of the things that was interesting for me about Legolas being a part of The Hobbit was for me to get to go back and create a backstory for Legolas, and particularly the father-son relationship.
Why did you do that? You promised to set him free.
And I did.
Thranduil is really a very complex character, you know. He's an elf with an axe to grind, you know, which is normally a dwarf's job, right?
Stay here, if you will, and rot. 100 years is a mere blink in the life of an elf.
You get the sense when you meet Thranduil that his agendas are so obviously distinct and his superiority is so evident that there's something frightening, and that's a different quality that we haven't seen before in an elven leader.
Thranduil is nefarious, he's duplicitous, he's a commanding individual. All of these elements you would think inform a very clarifying view of a character. They don't. They just make it more and more complex to find that beautiful and refined piece of design that is going to perfectly represent that individual.
We explored all kinds of different ideas for Thranduil back in the days with Guillermo del Toro in the beginning. And one was an Orientalist kind of influence that was coming through in terms of headdresses, in terms of makeup, in terms of costuming.
Some of the ideas I was playing with, because we were sort of pushing this more Orientalist sort of idea, was he's obviously someone really quite stone cold, quite imposing and intimidating, that would have sort of a mantle that could have a slightly armoured feel to it, and a crown that was kind of sort of dangerous looking, quite spiny. We even started playing around with the idea of painting tattoos on their skin, like with the henna painting in some cultures where they paint pattern work onto themselves as a decorative device.
A lot of kooky ideas were cooked up early on because Guillermo inspires people to really go laterally and think broadly. Of course, when Pete came on board, it was important that every character in the movie now complemented his vision for his film. And that required us to revisit the elves. And have you got any thoughts of an actor that we could base them on? Not that you may have cast someone, but even someone that we could design around body type.
Casting elves is honestly a nightmare. I mean, there's no point casting an elf if he looks like he's 55 years old or 60 years old. But at the same time, you can't have an 18-year-old, beautiful, fresh-faced person playing a 1,000-year-old elf. I mean, elves are immortal. So that's always our problem. And we had seen Lee Pace in a movie called The Fall. He was really quite remarkable in that film. When it came to looking for Thandril, we remembered Lee, and we met him in New York on a casting trip.
That week, I was so kind of excited to meet with them. I'm such a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings series that, you know, I kind of rewatched them all. I got the director's cut, watched that, watched all the documentaries, and kind of just put myself in Middle-earth.
How far did they travel?
Well, we tracked them as far as the Great Oak Clearing.
And there you killed them?
Yes, my lord.
You killed them all? You did not think to keep one of them alive?
It was dark. We were outnumbered.
I don't care if you were fighting alone in blind. I do not accept incompetence from a captain of my guard.
Lee had that gravity. He had a sense that he could be 1,000 years old, he could be immortal, but also that he had lived. He had lived a long life, he had seen a lot, and he had been through a lot. And that Lee really brought that feeling to the role.
Ytterl, my fighter, my golden-eyed assassin. You have skill and cunning. You could go far.
Thranduil, in my mind, started out as kind of the anti-Elrond. He doesn't sit and have conversations with wizards about the best possible course of action to benefit Middle-earth as a whole. He's just out for pursuing his own agenda. And so where Elrond is very simple and elegant in his costumery, with Thranduil we had the opportunity to actually go quite elaborate and fanciful.
Conceptually, you know, his look, it was really hard to get right. He is a king born and bred. Everything that was being drawn initially was trying to add that to him, when actually he doesn't need it.
There was kind of an aha moment when Philippa said, you know, you want to think about this guy as a rock star. And instead of buttoning him up, let's open his neckline and let's give him an arrogance, but also a kind of a self-assured cockiness.
And I kept going on and on and on about this, and it was like, you know, the really great designers, it's like the simplicity of a great suit. And I came across an image of Tom Ford.
Tom Ford is the American designer who turned Gucci around, and he just looks so cool, lounging out on a chair. And I mean lounging, I mean like really lounging, like hanging out on one side, legs off to the other.
And I was like, that's Thranduil.
In the next pieces of artwork that I did, I changed the way he was sitting on his throne in my pictures to sort of throwing himself around a little bit more. And that suddenly gave us a window into this character. And the costume design kind of took off from there.
Sometimes you design costumes before you know who the actor is. You might be designing for someone in your mind that's 6'4", and in walks someone 5'6". So anyway, with Lee, what you get is exactly what you want physically, because he's tall and handsome and he's got the best shoulders to hang a costume on.
God, that orange is just...
yummy.
Yeah.
The orange looks
bold.
phenomenal.
He's money, this elf king. I mean, it really is a fun character to dress up.
Amazing.
Working with Lee Pace was wonderful because he definitely wears clothes incredibly well. He's got a great presence, and he also moves incredibly well, all adding to that movement of the King of the Elves.
The source comes from here. Yes! That's the power.
Thranduil really had this burning, threatening presence, but he really had to just rein everything in.
So it was like this tornado that he was pulling back from just unleashing.
Why do I see myself going?
Elven movement training that we've done with Terry has kind of given me my entire character. It's not even about movement as much as it is about thought. Kind of like as the wind and the ocean pulls and pushes, it's like that's how they move through space.
You're riding these waves. It's like you're surfing. It's like you're surfing through space and you get to go, whoa, here's another wave.
Yeah. Terry was great. When I got back to The Hobbit, it had been 10, 12 years. He brought me back to my inner elf.
When Orlando first came in Lord of the Rings, I mean, he's the elf that we all know. We didn't have a movements coach like Terry, so Orlando being the first elf, he had to create an elvish trademark.
There was a sort of cat-like grace and presence, agility, constantly aware. All of those things that basically gave me the sense of being an immortal being. After 10 years of living my life, coming back to that kind of centered place of Legolas was really actually kind of wonderful.
On the breath, feel it come from your center.
The way Terry kind of cracked into this elven movement is that it's not just kind of a Zen peacefulness, it's like a relaxed engagement.
Let it be like a piss shiver that it almost lifts you up.
Yeah.
Okay?
Piss shiver. I don't even know what a piss shiver is.
All right, guys. We're gonna do some of the hardest shit there is. All right. See how when you get out of your head, when you get out of the zone, it's shit?
Yeah, see that?
It's all about...
It's the piss shiver.
It's killing us.
When Orlando and Lee worked together, it was really helpful because it's a father-son relationship, and it was just nice to have them connect in a very private space before they get on set, because then they have that history.
Ah, Legolas, Hun Hiro.
As Tolkien relates it later in The Lord of the Rings, Thranduil and Legolas are not Sylvan elves. They are Sindar. The Sindar are among the elves who left to go to the Undying Lands and stopped along the way. But they had some contact with the Valar and the powers that be.
The Sindar elves have been exposed to that divine influence, and now they serve as kind of governors and guiders of the Sylvan elves, who make up kind of the mass of the Woodland Realm society.
So one of the ways in which we tried to show that was very simply the white blonde hair. The pure blonde would be Thranduil and Legolas.
I think it's better to have not many others blonde, to tell you the truth.
I agree.
Because then it makes Legolas and his dad sort of stand out as the royal kind of line.
We had to make Thranduil sort of appear so supreme and really quite cold in his attitude. We decided he was above all hair ornamentation. We wanted him to look completely like he was in control. So although there was nothing holding his hair back, it never really moved. And if it did, it was always very controlled, as if there was another force looking after his hair for him.
The one thing I was afraid of is that they were going to pluck my eyebrows and do something crazy with my eyebrows. And I was like, Peter, please, no, please, let's, don't.
I originally did designs for him with a much more shaped eyebrow, like the other elves. In the end, we actually lifted his eyebrows with these little guy ropes you stick on, made of fish skin. So we did that to his eyebrow.
Can I get a shot of your eyes? I'll just get a shot.
And I got to wear these kind of icy gray contacts.
They do have a slightly unnerving quality.
We had to use color contacts for him. He's got very dark eyes, a bit like Orlando. Legolas had blue eyes, so his father has to have blue eyes as well.
Oh, the crown.
The crown was like a tangled mass of roots and thorns with little tiny leaves inlaid into them, representing the leaves of the primary trees of Mirkwood.
The crown designs that I gave him, I tried to put little barbs and bring everything to points so that, you know, if you're standing next to the guy and he turns his head, you're likely to get swiped, and he wouldn't care.
Oh, don't!
I just did it for that.
Tolkien describes Thranduil is having this amazing crown of thorns with seasonal leaves and berries and flowers sort of mixed in with it.
In the book, in other seasons, there are other things.
On his head was a crown of berries and red leaves, for the autumn was come again. In the spring, he wore a crown of woodland flowers.
They were shooting a scene that takes place in the prologue that didn't make it into the movie. So when we were going to put this crown back on, I said, well, we should probably change the berries to something else.
Here's the crown. Here's the crown.
You want the berries painted as well, don't you?
Yeah, let's just pull the berries out.
Just take them off.
Take them out.
What do you think?
Because the ever-wise Lee Pace brought it up.
Damn it, don't you blame me over this, Zane. Don't you put this on me.
Are you talking seasonal?
Yeah, we're going to...
I have spear leaves.
You do, yes.
But they're all the same colour.
No, we need green ones.
Zane, our executive producer, went out the back of the lot and brought back in a plant, and we just decorated the crown with that.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's green.
That's exactly what done.
Shove that in.
Shove that in that crown.
You take the yellow flower off.
Take the yellow flowers off. They just wrap these in and Bob's your uncle. I don't know what the hell the problem is here.
Thank goodness you're here, Zane.
I know.
We're saving the movie.
That happened on a daily basis with Zane, so he saved the film every day.
This looks like a leggy sword, much more than a Thranduil.
Oh, let me get a shot of you with that leggy, because it might be the only time you hold it.
Yes. It will most definitely be the only time I hold it.
Thranduil's sword is one of the most difficult swords that we've ever made, and therefore one of the most enjoyable objects we've ever made. Something very elven and very superior, almost samurai-like.
I drew a sword that basically just one long barb of metal from grip and pommel all the way through to the blade. Pretty lethal looking shape. And I love the idea that there would be cutouts in the sword.
We did do a huge amount of work on the Mirkwood Elves quite early on. And one of the elements that did endure and end up being carried through was this idea that many of the blades have what we came to call negative spaces in them, basically holes, which echo the engraving on the blade and to have light coming through in unexpected places.
His sword is the most sophisticated weapon we made because it's made out of a single block of aluminium, and the hand grip is hollow and pierced. If you're into swords, as we are, that gorgeous sword was really special.
And when I was going through what I saw it being carved, it's like this machine just kind of lasered carving it. It's a beautiful, beautiful weapon.
Then to have Lee be so enthusiastic about it was really special.
God, isn't it great? Richard, it's fucking great.
Lee didn't hold it aloft, he didn't hold it across his body. He immediately dropped it down towards the floor and turned, and the sword became an extension not of his body but of his purpose, of his arrogance as Thranduil, and it was like, oh God, cool moment.
Weta is just amazing. It's like every room you go into, this room they're sewing scales onto elven armor, and then you go into the next room and they're sculpting orc heads, and then they're doing the prosthetics for the dwarves in the next room, and then you go and there's like a sword master in the next room working out the blades. I said to Richard Taylor, I was like, I want a job here.
In Lee's downtime between filming, Lee started popping in too, and he actually threw himself straight into the work.
I painted some armor for dwarves. I made some dwarf crossbows. It's kind of ironic that they had me making dwarf stuff. I'm playing the king of the elves, man.
Tolkien's elves are almost superhuman in respect of their abilities when it comes to combat. And the fact that they have been around for thousands of years, you'd have to pick up a thing or two.
Thranduil. You know, he's the greatest warrior that you're ever going to see in Middle-earth. You see what Legolas can do. So
It was forefront in our minds that the father to Legolas would have an even more dynamic and extraordinary fighting style. But the more the conversations evolved, the more clear it became that because of who Thranduil is as a character, as we saw him develop through the movies, he needed a much greater level of heightened efficiency.
So less is better. So
not as flamboyant as Legolas.
Yeah,
I think the jumping and the swinging probably not so much with Thranduil. He's more just deadly with these two swords, like a couple of razor blades slicing through the orcs.
If we went back half his lifetime, you'd see Legolas in Thranduil, because he'd be acrobatic, he'd be doing his flamboyant stuff. But then over the years, he learnt, why waste that energy? Why not go back to simplicity and just make it do only what you need to do?
He keeps that blade close to him, and even when he is defending, it's offensive. He gets close to his enemy.
A lot of that fight stuff was Zor Lee, who wanted to do everything of his own. I mean, he was so dedicated into putting that time into learning to use both swords.
And your hand comes to the outside of your shoulder. That's it. Fast as you can. That's all you have to do. Good.
We designed quite a lot of sweeping overhead movements, dynamic kind of swirling sword stuff that are over his head, and a few glimpses within the fight. You might even say it was quite Matador-ish.
When you watch him, you could see, okay, if you think about Matador, oh yeah, you can sort of see that little style in him, very upright, very erect. But the way he used the weapons was so fast, he actually cut through the enemy like a hot knife through butter.
The Battle of the Five Armies fundamentally changes everything for Thranduil. His eyes are opened, and the Thranduil that we see after that is a man who is re-engaging with the world.
Your key characters, you want to feel that at the end of your story, they're not the same as they were at the beginning. And we've tried to do that with Thranduil.
When we were developing and writing and structuring the films, we had a backstory for these white gems that he literally goes to war over. And we thought, okay, these gems were made and fashioned for his wife, and that she never got to wear them.
I know an elf lord who will pay a pretty price for these.
He had lost his great love, his wife, which is why Thranduil wants the diamonds, and he is willing to go to war for them.
There's a necklace in that mountain. White gems strung upon silver. I want it retrieved.
It's also one of the reasons that he's withdrawn from the world in the northern reaches of Mirkwood is because he's suffered such great loss.
The Elven Gate.
Thranduil built this beautiful statue in memory of her and had it placed at the entrance to Mirkwood, which is really the entrance to his realm.
There is no grave, no memory.
In the books, we never hear anything about Legolas's mother. We imagine that she was lost to him.
The ancient kingdom of Angmar. My mother died there. My father does not speak of it.
By the time you get to the Battle of the Five Armies, you get a sense at the end, certainly, of a character who's beginning to soften.
Why does it hurt so much?
When Tauriel loses Keely, there is very much a connection, you know, of what that loss is about.
Her pain, her having loved, makes him see what he has become. And it awakens something inside of him. Sympathy, kindness. And those are coming back to someone who we've only ever seen as quite detached and cold.
And he actually realizes he's stuffed up so badly that he's damaged his relationship with his son.
Those gems were not all your wife left you, my friend. She left you a son. Tell me, which would she have you value more?
We always like to imagine, as part of her backstory, that she died defending her child, because that's one of his last lines to Legolas.
Your mother loved you more than anyone, more than life.
Thranduil began to realize that son, that living, breathing child, is far more important and valuable than those cold white gems. But he now knows that he's going to have to let his son go.
Where will you go?
I do not know.
Go north. Find the Dunedain.
I wrote that scene invoking Aragorn. I never thought it would get shot. I thought this has got nothing to do with anything. It's just utter geekdom. And I showed it to Pete and Fran, and they both immediately went, yeah, love it. Let's do it.
There's a young ranger amongst them. You should meet him.
When Thranduil says to Legolas, go and find this ranger, he's speaking the truth with the prescience that elves have, but also, I think, his own wish that his own son, you know, might in fact surpass his own deeds.
His father, Arathorn, was a good man. His son might grow to be a great one.
He's also acknowledging greatness in Legolas and acknowledging that his son may be a wiser man than he is.
It was an expression of love and apology, I guess.
That was the moment that my story is nicely brought to a close as a character that would leave the Mirkwood realm to be a part of the Fellowship of the Ring.
I think it's important to realize that we also have Thranduil, who is now ready to play his part. It's there in the background of Lord of the Rings, in the appendices.
During the War of the Ring, while Minas Tirith is being assailed in the south, Sauron sends forces against the Elven realms of the north. Thranduil and his army of elves repel the orcs that attack Mirkwood.
Basically, they tie up a huge amount of Sauron's resources and they prevent the north from falling.
Thranduil is now a character going forward with a sense of purpose that is not motivated by loss or by personal gain, but by a genuine desire to help. He's a totally different character to the one that we met in the beginning of The Hobbit.